Alright, now we're going to look at the cosine curve. So again, you hopefully did this and understood this on the introductory task. This is going to be a little bit quicker and easier since you just looked at sine. And sine and cosine are actually incredibly similar, if not the exact same thing, but just shifted over pi halves. Well, we do want to understand, okay, the generic cosine function. This is what our graph looks like. This again is 2 periods. Here is 1 period. Here are the 5 points for 1 period that I would look at. So, as I mentioned with sine, this picture right here that I'm tracing, you are going to want to have implanted in your head as far as what 1 period of the cosine curve looks like. If you can memorize that, it's really easy to graph cosine because it's the same as sine, except instead of starting on the axis, I start above the axis at a peak, or at a valley if it was a negative cosine curve, and then I just plot my 5 points following this pattern. Okay, let's look at the generic function of cosine. It's the same as sine. Y equals a cosine bx. What do these mean? Amplitude is the absolute value of a. Period is 2 pi over b. Intervals are the period over 4. So again, nothing has changed from what we did just do with sine. So now let's look at graphing and our strategies. So here if I have y equals 1/2 cosine of 3x, the amplitude is 1/2. The period is 2 pi over 3. The intervals are 2 pi over 3 over 4, which is actually going to be 2 pi over 12, which is pi over 6. So those are our intervals. What are our strategies? Same as before. Find the amp, the period, and the intervals. We just did that. Draw and label the x and y axis based on intervals and amplitude. Plot 5 points and trace curve. Okay, so let's do that. Here we go. I have an amplitude of 1/2, intervals of pi 6. So I'm going to call this, we're graphing 2 periods. 1/2, negative 1/2, here's 0, pi 6, 2 pi 6 is pi thirds, 3 pi 6, pi halves, and 4 pi 6 is 2 pi thirds. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's 1 period. Let's continue on, we need 4 more points. So this was pi 6, 2 pi 6, 2 pi 6, 4 pi 6, now we're at 5 pi 6. 6 pi 6 is pi, 7 pi 6, and 8 pi 6 is 4 pi thirds. Alright, that's a 3. Okay, so now plot my points. This is cosine. So again, what does cosine look like? Cosine looks like this. Since this is a positive cosine curve, it's going to start at the peak. If it was a negative cosine curve, it would start down here at the bottom. Then I just follow along the pattern. That's one period. Continue the pattern. That's two periods. Draw my curve. Bam. Cosine. What do you know? Alright. I want you to try to find the amplitude period in the intervals for y equals -2 cosine pi x over 2. Pause the video. Do that. Unpause when you're ready to check. Okay, so although a is negative, we know the amplitude is the absolute value of a. So amplitude is 2, period is 2 pi over 2, which is 4. The intervals are period divided by 4, which is 1. Now I want you to try and do the graph. Pause the video, graph it, unpause when you're ready to check your work. Okay, so here we have one period from 0 to 4, which is actually 5 locations, and then the next period from 4 to 8. It was a negative cosine curve, so it starts down at the -2, and then it goes up and follows the pattern from there. Okay, so what did we learn here? We learned the amplitude for cosine is the same as sine, the period is the same, the intervals are the same, the graphing strategies are essentially the same. The only difference is the actual picture of the cosine curve for one period, so where you start that first point. That's what you want to memorize. What does the picture of a sine curve look like versus what does the picture of one period of a cosine curve look like? Otherwise, the graphing process for them is exactly the same.